Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file's being recorded for the October 2022 edition of Socialism for All. It's an audiobook and discussion of the attitude of the bourgeois parties and of the Workers' Party to the Duma elections by Lenin from 1906. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So this piece was published December 31st, 1906 in Terni Truda, number 2, published here according to that text. The source is Lenin Collected Works, Progress Publishers, 1965, Moscow, Volume 11. HTML transcription and markup by R. Symbala, and it's in the public domain at the Lenin Internet Archive within the Marxists Internet Archive. Marxists.org. Thanks as usual to MIA for hosting this and thousands of other free Marxist texts. So let's remember, just for historical context before we start the text, this is from December 1906. What was going on in Russia at this time? Well, basically the first Russian Revolution was 1905 to 1907, and this was a time when the last remnants of Russian feudalism were starting to really give way, break up, and capitalism was emerging through. It was also a time of mass popular revolts and strikes. Workers and peasants were not happy with the system and wanting change. But while the workers were organizing in workers' parties and the peasants were organizing in peasant parties, and of course the bourgeoisie was organizing in bourgeois parties. So there was also a difference of opinion between these different groups about the new Duma or parliament, which was set up as a concession from the Tsar to the, rebelling population. At first, the Duma was just supposed to be an advisory group. Basically, it would be a parliament, but with no binding vote. It would just be, again, sort of advising the Tsar on what to do. Later, this was changed, so there were different approaches to, how hard to push on this, and basically how to treat these new elections. So anyway, let's pick it up here with Lenin. The papers are full of news about the preparations for the elections. Almost every day we're informed either of a new government interpretation, striking out of the voters' list one more category of unreliable citizens, or of new persecutions, prohibitions of meetings, suppression of newspapers, and the arrest of suspected electors or candidates. The Black Hundreds have raised their heads, whooping and hooting more insolently than ever. By the way, the Black Hundreds were arch-reactionaries, so monarchists, anti-Semites, similar in practice to what we would consider fascists today. The parties that are objectionable to the government are also preparing for the elections. These parties are confident, and justly confident, that the mass of the voters will have their say, will take advantage of the elections to express their true convictions in spite of all the tricks, pinpricks, and restrictions, great and small, that are directed against the voters. This confidence is based on the fact that the most ferocious persecutions, the most intolerable pinpricks, will at most eliminate hundreds, thousands, let us say tens of thousands of voters throughout Russia. But this will not alter the sentiments and the attitude of the masses towards the government. 10 or 20,000 voters can be struck off the list in St. Petersburg, say, but this will only cause the 150,000 voters in the capital to withdraw into their shells, as it were, to lie low for a time. They will not disappear, however, and their mass sentiment will not change. If it does change, it will not, of course, be in favor of the government. Therefore, unless the electoral law is radically amended, unless all remnants of electoral legality are finally trampled upon, and they still can be further trampled upon by means of systematic arrests of electors, one may expect the very worst from Stolypin, there is still no doubt that the mood of the masses will decide the elections, and the decision will certainly not be in favor of the government and its Black Hundreds. And all non-supporters of the government are placing their hopes in the masses of the voters. But if you examine carefully what this hope in the masses really amounts to, what the attitude of the various parties is towards the masses, you will observe a vast difference between the bourgeois parties and the party of the proletariat. The cadets are at the head of the liberal bourgeois parties. During the elections to the first Duma, they shamefully betrayed the struggle. They refused to take part in the boycott. They themselves went tamely to the elections and drew the raw masses after them. Now they are placing their hopes on the inertness of these masses, and on the restrictions which have been imposed on agitation and on the left parties in the conduct of their election campaign. The cadets' hope in the masses is hope in the immaturity and servitude of the masses. He argues as follows: the masses will not understand our program and tactics. They will not go beyond a peaceful and legal, the most peaceful and timid protest, not because they do not wish to, but because they will not be allowed to. They will vote for us, for the lefts have no newspapers, no meetings, no leaflets, no security against arbitrary arrest and persecution. So thinks the cadet, and he proudly raises his eyes to heaven and says, "I thank thee, Lord, that I am not one of those extremists. I am not a revolutionary. I shall be able to adjust myself most obediently and abjectly to any measures. I shall even get my election forms from the peaceful renovators." Hence, the whole of the cadets' election campaign is directed to frightening the masses with the Black Hundred danger, and the danger from the extreme left parties, to adapting themselves to the Philistinism, cowardice, and flabbiness of the petty bourgeois, and to persuading him that the cadets are the safest, the most modest, the most moderate, and the most well-behaved of people. Now, just a comment here briefly. I'm going to comment more at the end. Does this sound at all familiar? Have you ever heard bourgeois parties behaving like this in elections? Because it sounds super familiar to me. Every day the cadet papers ask their readers, "Are you afraid, Philistine? Rely on us. We're not going to frighten you. We're opposed to violence. We're obedient to the government. Rely on us, and we shall do everything for you as far as possible." And behind the backs of the frightened Philistines, the cadets resort to every trick to assure the government of their loyalty, to assure the lefts of their love of liberty, to assure the peaceful renovators of their affinity with their party and their election forms. No enlightenment of the masses, no agitation to rouse the masses, no exposition of consistent democratic slogans, only a haggling for seats behind the backs of the frightened Philistines. Such is the election campaign of all the parties of the liberal bourgeoisie, from the non-party people of Tovarish to the Party of Democratic Reforms. The attitude of the Workers' Party towards the masses is exactly the reverse. The important thing for us is not to get seats in the Duma by means of compromises. On the contrary, those seats are important only because, and insofar as, they can serve to develop the political consciousness of the masses, to raise them to a higher political level, to organize them, not for the sake of Philistine happiness, not for the sake of tranquility, order, and peaceful bourgeois bliss, but for the struggle for the complete emancipation of labor from all exploitation and all oppression. Only for this purpose, and only to the extent that they help us to achieve it, are seats in the Duma and the whole election campaign important for us. The Workers' Party places all its hopes on the masses who are not frightened, not passively submissive, and who do not humbly bear the yoke, but those who are politically conscious, demanding, and militant. The Workers' Party must treat with contempt the usual liberal method of frightening the Philistine with the bogey of the Black Hundred danger. The whole task of the Social Democrats is to make the masses conscious of the real danger, of the actual aims in the struggle of these forces, whose strength lies not in the Duma, which find full expression not in Duma debates, and which will settle the question of Russia's future outside the Duma. The Workers' Party therefore warns the masses against the clandestine election tricks of the cadet bourgeoisie, against its stultifying cry, "Entrust to us, lawyers, professors, and enlightened landlords, the task of combating the Black Hundred danger." The Workers' Party tells the masses, "Trust only your socialist consciousness and your socialist organization. To surrender priority in the struggle and the right to lead it to the liberal bourgeoisie is tantamount to selling the cause of liberty for grandiloquent phrases, for the tawdry brilliance of fashionable and gaudy signboards. No Black Hundred danger in the Duma can be as harmful as the corruption of the minds of the masses who are blindly following the liberal bourgeoisie, its slogans, its candidates, and its policy. Among the masses to whom the Workers' Party is appealing, the strongest numerically are the peasants and various sections of the petty bourgeoisie. They are more determined than the cadets, more honest, and 1,000 times more capable of fighting. But in politics, they are too often led by the cadet windbags. Even now, they are wavering between the militant proletariat and the compromising bourgeoisie. The advocates of blocks with the cadets are not only doing harm to the proletariat and to the whole cause of liberty, they are also prejudicing the development of political consciousness among the urban and rural poor. They are not performing their immediate duty, which is to free these people from the influence of the liberal bourgeoisie. Look at the Trudovics, the, quote, popular socialists, and the Socialist Revolutionary Party. They too are wavering, and also are mainly occupied with plans for deals with the cadets. The leaders of the Trudoviks, having failed to form a party of their own, are multiplying their Duma mistakes tenfold by appealing to the masses to vote for the cadets. Anakin, through newspaper reporters, Jilikin, in Tovarish, etc. This is downright treachery to the cause of the peasant struggle, downright betrayal of the peasants to the liberal landlords, who would rob the peasants by means of a, quote, fair compensation as thoroughly as their forefathers did in 1861. And as for the popular socialists, even the cadets are laughing at them and calling them second reserve cadets. For example, Milyakov and Rech. Their leaders, Anensky and others, also appeal for blocks with the cadets. Their tiny party, which according to Tovarish, a paper which is favorably disposed to them, is weaker even than the Party of Peaceful Plunder, and which has only about 2,000 members throughout Russia, is a mere appendage of the cadets. The position of the socialist revolutionaries is also ambiguous. Both in the October period and in the period of the First Duma, they concealed the fact that they had split with the popular socialists. They continued to collaborate with them and jointly published the same newspapers. Today, they are not conducting any open and independent struggle, are not sufficiently broadly, openly, and sharply attacking the second reserve cadets, are not supplying the masses with adequate data for criticizing that party, and are not making any appraisal in principle of the whole election campaign and all electoral agreements in general. It is the great historical duty of the Workers' Party to help to create an independent political party of the working class. Those who advocate blocks with the cadets hinder the fulfillment of this duty. Another great duty that confronts the Workers' Party is to free the masses of the ruined, poverty-stricken, and doomed urban petty bourgeoisie and peasantry from the influence of the ideas and prejudices of the liberal bourgeoisie. The fulfillment of this duty is also being hindered by those who advocate blocks with the cadets. They are not divorcing the peasants from the liberals, but are strengthening this unnatural alliance, which is fatal to the cause of liberty and to the cause of the proletariat. They are not warning the peasant masses against the liberals' backstairs politics, or rather political intrigue for the distribution of seats in the Duma, but are sanctioning this intrigue by taking part in it. Down with all blocks, the Workers' Party must conduct its election campaign independently, not only in words, but in deeds. It must provide the whole people, and the masses of the proletariat in particular, with a model of courageous and consistent criticism based on principle. Only in that way shall we succeed in rallying the masses for effective participation in the struggle for freedom, and not in the sham liberalism of the cadet betrayers of freedom. That is the end of the audiobook. So, again, there are differences in some of the circumstances, obviously technologically and the extent of reach and development of capitalism between modern-day United States and Russia 116 years ago. That said, there is also a lot that is very similar. The basic class interests are the same, though the size of the classes may be different, etc. We are still basically in the same mode of production, and there is a lot that carries over fairly closely. When you listen to or read a description like this of an election in Tsarist Russia, and immediately a lot stands out about the way the Bourgeois Party treats the left and the way that they look down upon the masses and count upon the masses being frightened and unable to act on their own and only following the lead of the bourgeois cadets. I mean, is this not exactly how the leading liberal bourgeois party in the United States, the Democrats, treats the left to this very day? Some things really have not changed. So going through this piece, speaking about the cadets, now they are placing their hopes on the inertness of these masses. So the bourgeoisie starts out as, popular freedom fighters when they are leading the fight against feudalism at the very beginning of capitalism, which we were seeing at that time in Russia. But then as soon as the bourgeoisie has its revolution and really starts to make feudalism fade into the background as a conquered power that is in decline, then their new task appears before them as primary, which is the subjugation of the working masses into capitalism, so that they can exploit all of these working masses, get us working for them, proletarianize the population, and have huge numbers of people multiplying their capital, making them richer daily. So that really becomes the new threat. First, they were popular freedom fighters. Then they need to defend their minoritarian exploitative system, which just overthrew the old minoritarian exploitative system, against their new subject class, the proletariat. So they really don't want this whole democracy thing to go, quote, too far and really involve the masses in a way that would involve the masses being aware of their own material class interests, because they're diametrically opposed to those of the bourgeoisie. At first, there's common cause in fighting against the czar and the forces of feudal reaction. But then the bourgeoisie becomes the new oppressor. They have to stop the revolution just in capitalism, and what do? They anchor themselves to reaction to keep things from progressing forward into socialism, because if the masses really had their say in that moment, well, we wouldn't want the bourgeoisie in charge either. We want to be in charge. That's in our interest. So that's what Lenin is saying here, and we'll get to those quotes again, but it's also what Marx and Engels said as early as 1850. It's currently the pinned video at the Socialism for All YouTube channel. It's Marx's address. The title of the video is Marx on Guns, Address to the Central Committee, 1850. But in that, I mean, it's where the under no pretext quote comes from, which is why I titled it that. But he also goes into, the way that the proletariat should organize as the capitalists are setting up their new capitalist government. Basically, remain fierce critics of it, organize separately from it, have spaces that are completely free of bourgeois influence to do our organizing in, set up parallel workers' governments, and eventually, pick your moment for when you can actually abolish the new capitalist government. But this means not getting caught up in it as the bourgeoisie is doing their platitudes and their weak slogans, etc. Don't get caught up in it. So again, the cadets' hope in the masses is hope in their immaturity and servitude. So the cadet argues, well, the masses won't understand our program and tactics. They won't go beyond a peaceful and legal, peaceful and timid protest, not because they don't want to, but they won't be allowed to. So they're going to vote for us. They're not organized. And the cadet is just saying that they're going to be the, rational centrists, and that's going to attract everybody because after all, these, extreme left parties, they're not organized, etc. If this sounds depressingly similar to the situation that we have today, well, it's in our power to change that. So what do the cadets do? No enlightenment of the masses, no agitation to rouse the masses, no exposition of consistent democratic slogans, just a haggling for seats behind everybody's backs. So is that what you see from liberal bourgeois parties today in their dealings with workers' parties and the left? That's what I see. So again, I think little has changed there. So as Lenin continues, the attitude of the Workers' Party is exactly the reverse. The important thing is not for the socialists to get seats in the parliament by way of compromise. On the contrary, the seats are important only because and insofar as they serve as a tool for developing the political consciousness of the masses. So it's part of the struggle, not just an end in itself that you need to sacrifice all your principles for. Literally the opposite. Only for the purpose of the struggle, specifically the struggle for the complete emancipation of labor from all exploitation and oppression, only to the extent that the seats in the parliament help with that, is the entire election campaign important to socialists. So the Workers' Party is placing its hopes on the workers who aren't submissive to that liberal bourgeoisie, to the fear campaigns about the, quote, bogey of the Black Hundred danger. Not that the Black Hundred danger isn't real or that, the Black Hundreds are good, actually, as the contrarians might tell us today, but because the bourgeoisie is not really going to fight those Black Hundreds. It's like today, the Democrats are not an anti-fascist party. They might point out sometimes the fascist things that the Republican Party is doing, and there's real things there which are hugely concerning to any socialist. But they're not an anti-fascist party. They're a fascist collaborating party. And if you actually want an end to that, you need to organize as a socialist, not as a bourgeois-tailing lickspittle that is, as Lenin says, making the stultifying cry, entrust to us, lawyers, professors, and enlightened landlords, the task of combating the Black Hundred danger. So it's really what they need, because if the Democrats were serious, for example, about being an anti-fascist party, as I've said many times, they would align with the left to crush the Republican Party, send it into the dustbin of history. They could do that easily because a lot of what the Republicans stand for and the Democrats stand for is not very popular. So if they were to ally with the left and do hugely popular reforms that large swaths of the country are clamoring for, then they could defeat easily, handily, whoever was opposing that change, as both parties are opposing right now. And then we could send these big bad Republicans packing and we would never have to deal with them again. But that's not what the Democrats do. Why? Because once the Republicans are gone, the left would be the competitor to the Democrats, former ally in that fight, but then a competitor. And the people behind the Democratic Party who own and control it, who incidentally also own and control the Republican Party, they need that political dialogue and the political fight to stay centered between the Republicans and Democrats so that nothing ever changes. If one of these parties was out of the mix, the left would be able to actually rally the working masses of the country against whoever was left, and that would be a real fight. And the real fight is what the very rich capitalists in charge really do not want emerging. So as Lenin said, the advocates of blocks with the cadets are not only doing harm to the proletariat and to the whole cause of liberty, they're also prejudicing the development of political consciousness among the urban and rural poor. They're not performing their immediate duty, which is to free these people from the influence of the liberal bourgeoisie. So we need to get people away from the Democratic Party in, our current situation in the United States. This is why I advocate for a Dem exit followed by a left coalition. It seems like most of the left parties, it's fragmented. Many of the Marxist parties are revisionist, and then a lot of the parties aren't Marxist at all. Together, I do believe that we could do something as a left coalition, as there is overwhelming support for many policy positions which are opposed by both Democrats and Republicans. And you see this, whether it's Occupy Wall Street or the Bernie Sanders 2 campaigns. I think we need to do the Bernie Sanders thing, but outside the Democratic Party. That would get the left growing. And from there, yes, I realize Bernie Sanders was not a communist, etc. That's not the point. The point is get people developing their political consciousness again by getting some struggle going again. Because, okay, you're here listening to Socialism for All on YouTube, and you're listening to some Lenin audiobooks. The overwhelming majority of the population is not. The overwhelming majority of the population is never going to be communist. They're going to be working people who have some degree of awareness of their own interests, and that's on a spectrum from 0 to 100. Most people are somewhere in the middle as far as correctly identifying their interests. We communists, it's our job to get organized and to exert the best influence that we can on the masses and to lead them in their struggle. I mean, we're also working people and, our struggle collectively. But my point is, it's not exclusively a communist struggle in the sense that the overwhelming majority of the population is not going to be communists, especially not overnight. That said, they can participate in their own liberation without, listening to and deeply analyzing, Capital Volume 3 or something like that. Most people are not going to make it to that level of education, the sort of inner circle of the party, things like that. But that said, people can become a lot more aware of this stuff. And some of that happens through book learning and discussion groups. Some of it happens through direct participation in the struggle. To the extent that the struggle isn't even happening, that consciousness is not being sharpened at nearly the rate that it could be. So that's what we want to see, is more of that. And right now, the Democrats have done such a good job of pouring cold water on the entire struggle, and just really every time that the flame gets sparked, of dousing it and extinguishing it. And we need to really fight against that. And that means keeping separate from that group, because that's all they're going to do. So taking the example of the popular socialists, their leaders also appeal for blocks with the cadets, but their tiny party, which only has about 2,000 members, is a mere appendage of the cadets, and the cadets laugh at them. This reminds me of CPUSA's #VoteAgainstFascism campaign. It's fucking irrelevant. You don't need anybody else telling you to vote for Democrats. Literally, we're already blanketed with those messages in the first place. The entire point of being a communist, yes, we want to strive for the best conditions for class struggle that we can have, but it's incredibly far behind the times and the consciousness of the masses in 2022, who have already largely rejected the Democratic Party, to be going for that. You're literally just fighting for a past moment that is no longer relevant. People are ready for much more action than that, but what they're lacking is the leadership and the clear calls for moving forward in that future. So finishing this out, it's the great historical duty of the Workers' Party to help to create an independent political party of the working class. Those who advocate blocks with the cadets hinder the fulfillment of this duty because, again, you wind up just becoming an appendage, a tail. You really don't want that. So Lenin says, down with all blocks. The Workers' Party must conduct its election campaign independently, not only in words, but in deeds. It must provide the whole people, and the proletariat in particular, with a model of courageous and consistent criticism based on principle. So you can't do this lesser evilism shit in either direction. We need a party for workers that actually fights for workers. And as we know in capitalism, the interests of the bourgeoisie, the rich capitalists, and the proletariat are diametrically opposed. So there's really nothing in common here, and we have to struggle against them, not do lesser evilism. That's not how this works. Lenin concludes, only in that way shall we succeed in rallying the masses for effective participation in the struggle for freedom, and not in the sham liberalism of the cadet betrayers of freedom. So you want to do revisionism, you want to be a liberal, go be a fucking Democrat, but leave that shit outside of the socialist universe. Now, within that world of the left, of people who've actually made it over to the left and abandoned the Democratic Party, I would say that this is mostly people from the Greens on over, and there's many other parties, including Marxist parties there as well. I do believe that we need to come together. This is such a numerically large population in the United States that all of these little parties have not been able to come together in a way that's able to rally the tens of millions of people that we really need to penetrate national consciousness and really get a movement going. We saw Bernie Sanders do it, but he funneled it into the Democratic Party, where again it got extinguished, just really pissed away. AOC did the exact same thing. I mean, AOC was pretty much a Democrat from day one. Bernie Sanders was independent for decades, at least nominally independent prior to that, and had somewhat different politics from the Democratic Party. But in the end, he hitched his wagon, and everybody who was in it, and all that money, time, and energy, he hitched it to the Democrats, who Joe Biden's in office, and it's giving me like Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush vibes. Things are not the way that they need to be. We need radical change. Capitalism is going into a gigantic period of instability right now. We had the dot-com bubble around 2000 in the late 90s. We had the housing and mortgage fraud bubble in the 2000s, leading to the 2008 global economic meltdown. Now we have an everything bubble mounting, and when it pops, I mean, this system is in its death throes. The rate of profit is lower than ever. Things that aren't profitable, capitalists don't want to do. And so we're getting into a system where just nobody's needs are being met, and people are just being squeezed and squeezed. We desperately need leadership and organization independent of the system to fight for a new world that will actually give us a future. Tying your wagon to the Democratic Party is tying your wagon to a ship that is going over the edge of a waterfall onto certain death below. And some people who are just so afraid of the Republicans or whatever, and granted, they're not a pleasant bunch. I don't like the Republicans. I would never support them either, ever. They are, though, not looking at this situation from a systemic historical perspective. We need to be making preparations for socialism, not fighting for crumbs aboard a ship that is, again, about to go over the edge. It's going to be hard in this fight, and we're already having massive austerity imposed on us, and there's more coming no matter who you vote for. So what do? We build workers' parties and coalitions of parties working together, which are able to lay the groundwork for workers to separate out from this and to start planning a new future beyond the imminent end of capitalism. The alternative, if we do not do this, if we leave it in the hands of the capitalists, is misery, horror, and ruin beyond your wildest imagination. Literally, we're just getting started with that world Let's end it at the very first opportunity, but that requires getting organized fast so that when those opportunities come up, we can make the absolute most of them. And again, as far as winning seats in elections, as Lenin said, the only point of that under capitalism is just in service of the struggle to sharpen political consciousness, etc. It's not the way that we're going to do this. So when I say build the parties, build the coalitions, that doesn't mean winning elections. It means building a party. It means networking with people. It means getting the ideas going. It means building a shared vision of what is going to happen next at our first opportunity. Again, we're in a pre-revolutionary period right here, and we need to be ready when those revolutionary moments pop up. Democratic Party, you just can't do that kind of organizing. It's a bourgeois space full of bourgeois influence, and we need our own space that we can actually do this kind of preparation for massive, radical, militant class struggle. So seek out those spaces because nothing else is really going to cut it in the upcoming catastrophes as capitalism goes into more and more crises. All right, I'm going to leave it there. What do you think? Leave a question or comment below. We'll continue the discussion in the comment section as always. Otherwise, thanks to the patrons. Patreon.com/socialismforall if you'd like to get your name on the screen as theirs are right now. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more. It can be recurring or not. Obviously, anything is good and encouraging and helpful. The recurring also helps me to plan this from month to month. I would make content even if nobody paid, but the support lets me spend a lot more time on it, and so you get better both quality and quantity of content up here on the channel. Beyond that, engagement counts, so like, share, subscribe, and comment. All of that is going to help YouTube to recommend this content to more people, so more people are going to see it, and we need to use every tool at our disposal right now in preparing for the fight. All right, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.